take a stand for protecting our liberties. And if you notice, I don't see many elected officials here other than that. How many elected officials do we have other than school board?
Part of the Sherman ISD trustee.
Okay, and we'll get to meet. And, okay, speaking for?
Robin McCoy for Senator Pat Fallon.
Okay, they have a meeting tonight somewhere, don't they? Yeah, the ones who are trying to get Representative John Ratcliffe's position, since he has moved on to better and bigger things. Okay, I want to welcome everyone who's here tonight, and thank you for coming. Has everyone been receiving my notices? We're getting ready to transition to MailChimp, so you won't be getting emails from me or from Anna in the future. We're going to go to MailChimp. I finally put up the white flag and said, okay, let's do it. So that should make it a lot easier. Okay, I am Karen Toiber. I'm coordinator for the Texoma Patriots. And we want to start tonight with a pledge first to the U.S. flag and then to the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now our Texas flag. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible. I think they got my sign. They're all used individually. Well, this one doesn't want us to stay, so good. Okay. Anna has scripture.
And reading from Psalms chapter 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should change, and though the mountains slip into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains quake at its swelling cry.
Okay, thank you. Real quick question, is everyone here registered to vote?
Yes.
Anyone not registered, because we can sure help you. Okay.
Did everybody sign in?
Did everyone sign in? Do we have contact information for you? And does everyone who wants one get a copy of the newest flyer, newsletter that we sent out? Okay, you know I like to have quotes, and I have two tonight. One is from Representative Andy Biggs. He's the head of the Freedom Caucus in the House of Representatives. And he's from Arizona, and he said, as we look at the fork in the road, sometimes seemingly so simple as a universal mask mandate symbolizes where we can choose to go, on a path of renewed freedom or down the path of untethered government control of every aspect of our lives. So that's the path that we seem to be on right now. And then Thomas Sowell had this to say. He said, historians of the future will have a hard time figuring out how so many organized groups of strident jackasses succeeded in leading us around by the nose and morally intimidating the majority into silence.
Amen. Yes.
And then a friend sent me this thing, and I thought it was the funniest thing I got today. You see the pigeons? Save our statues. Okay, because I just want to mention that our next meeting is going to be July 7th, and it's going to be at the restaurant of Joe Williams and his wife. and it's at the Waffle Shop in Denison, and we're showing the movie Uncle Tom, and talk a little bit about that after. But because Senator Hall drives 2 hours and wants to get on the road as quickly as he can, let me introduce him, and we'll give his talk, and then if you would please stay after his talk in the Q&A, and just let me tell you about all the things we're doing, okay? So, I've known him since we grew up in the Tea Party together, started back in '09, and he and his wife Kay, they were everywhere I was, they were, so we grew up together. I never met any of his 4 boys, but he has a nice family, and he's been using what is faith and hard work to raise his family. Senator Hall graduated from the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina with a degree in electrical engineering and received a regular commission as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. The way to fly, yay! While a cadet at the Citadel, he received numerous awards for leadership. He was the only Air Force cadet selected to be a battalion commander, was awarded the coveted Wade Hampton Sabre as the graduating cadet who had contributed the most to the Citadel during the 4 years he was the cadet, and was listed in Who's Who in American colleges his senior year. Upon graduation, Bob began his active duty as a systems engineer working to develop the Minuteman missile system during the Cold War at Norton Air Force Base in California. And there he achieved the rank of captain. Now, we've had Bob come and talk before. He talked about the grid and saving the grid and the EMP, electromagnetic pulse, and how things are dangerous in that area too. And so with his background, he has a lot of training, and I know he's highly respected throughout the military for his experience and background there. After the Air Force, Senator Hall worked in the aerospace industry as a systems engineer and business development manager. In 1982, he left the corporate world and began working as an independent proposal consultant to Aerospace and Defense Corporation. Then in 1984, he formed his own company, Professional Proposal Management, Inc., which remains a family-owned business today. He has a compelling sense of duty, shaped by his military service, his business experience, and love for his country. And this drives him to leave behind a legacy of a patriotic servant for his children and grandchildren. Envisioning their futures compelled him to become actively involved in the state's political process, and strongly believes it is time to stand in the gap for our children, our liberties, and our future. And with that, we have honor, duty, and country, and let's welcome
It's such an honor and a pleasure to be here, not just to be here tonight, but to be able to serve the people of Texas at this time in my life. I just thank my Lord Jesus Christ, and I'm just humbly grateful. One promise I did make, just to finish out, so you know who I am and where I'm coming from. When I was first running, I made one campaign promise, and that was that I would go to God every day on my knees and ask for His wisdom, His courage, and His strength to know His will and do it. And that is one promise I've kept. So what I'm doing and where I do it, I feel that this is what He would have me do, and I will do this as long as that's what He chooses, because He waited an awful long time before He got me involved in politics. I had nothing to do with politics until after retiring and being married to a Texan, living at the beach in Destin, Florida. I'm sure most of you heard about Destin, Florida. Living at the beach, I got a note one day from Kay that said, "This is where I'm going to be in Rockwall, Texas, if you care to join me." Grandkids had showed up, and like monarch butterflies, all Texas mothers return to Texas when the grandkids show up. And so that's how we did it back here. And then the Tea Party got started. I got involved in the Tea Party. And the next thing I knew, rather than go be on mission trips, mission to what Kay and I were going to do, because we had been trained with the Texas Baptist Men's Disaster Feeding Unit, Southern Baptist Disaster Men's Feeding Unit, and I volunteered with Angel Flight, an organization that provides transportation for people for medical services where they can't fly on commercial airlines. Pilots with airplanes will volunteer their time and effort to take them. So that was going to be our mission work. And the next thing I knew, I found a whole new different mission field, as somebody pointed out, in serving the people of Texas. And so I've approached this whole thing as one of my goals is to get through this with as little rubbing off of the politician part of this thing as I possibly can. To recognize that public office like this is that of a servant serving the people.
Has everyone else silenced their phones?
So anyway, and I have now decided that in what we've been going through, that while the politically correct thing is to sit quietly until we show up back in Austin in January of next year, I just can't do that anymore. So recognizing what we've been doing to make sure that people understand what is happening and communicate the truth, because our media doesn't do a real good job of actually informing you of what is actually happening. There are a number of things that I think I've written now 4 letters to the governor on things that ought to be done and should be done. I started out early on when the pharmacies had, the pharmacy board had shut down the pharmacies and disallowed them from being able to, or for physicians being able to write prescriptions for hydroxychloroquine as they saw fit. And I managed to get them to change that so that doctors could do that. And then when we shut down our hospitals, and at the state level, we did a triage of the people of Texas by dividing the people of Texas into 2 categories, first class and second class. The first class citizens of Texas were those who either had or might have the Chinese virus. Everybody else in Texas was second class. And then we reserved 100% of our hospital medical facilities for that 100th of 1% of the people who might get the virus. And that meant that we had women that went without breast cancer surgery. I had a good friend of mine that was taking chemo for a lump on his kidney, liver. He was within 1 treatment of finishing, and they stopped it, and he now has to start over again. We had one lady in the district that needed knee surgery. She couldn't get it, and she committed suicide. Since this has started, I live in a neighborhood that has a lot of pilots in it, and as of 3 weeks ago, I was informed that since this shutdown, we've had 6 Southwest pilots commit suicide. In one of our meetings, our discussions on the daily call with the state not long ago, one of our reps from down in the Woodlands area reported that over the weekend he had 4 people die of the COVID over that weekend. Of course, the statement said, "Oh, that's too bad, that's a shame," so on. He says, "No, however, we had 7 people commit suicide in the same time frame." Folks, we've had tremendous damage done to us. I call it the other curve. I started asking the question about the other curve the second week we were in this. That is, when I say the phone call, we do a phone call every week of all the legislators and the state officials in health and human services, emergency services, and others. And I asked the question about who's monitoring, because if you recall, they wanted to flatten the curve. Talked about flattening the curve. Understand, flattening the curve does not change the number of people that dies. It just spreads it out over a longer time period. And so I said, what about the other curve? The curve that we are creating by what we're doing, by changing our society, by telling people that they are non-essential. I said, every job is essential to someone. And that was a horrible, horrible way to categorize it. But we're putting people out of work. People cannot get medical needs being taken care of. So that's creating a problem that's going to have a long-term impact. And so somewhere, our cure is going to be worse than the disease itself. And it got worse as we went along, because if you remember when we started this thing, what were we told? Deadly. 7% death rate or more. Highly contagious. We're going to have 240,000 Texans dead by August. Our hospitals are going to be overrun. We'd have people dying at home, in the streets, in the hallways, in the hospitals. We wouldn't be able to take care of them. And so we shut down everything for that. And as time went on and the data came in, those who created those models were quick. They started changing their models. They changed them. The one that initially predicted the huge numbers, I think it was 500,000 in England. They quickly reduced that to 200, to 20,000, and then to 5,800. In the United States, they ratcheted it down. And what we now see is that 7% death rate, according to the CDC now, is more like 0.26. Huge difference between the two. And the contagious, yes, it's contagious, but so is the flu and a lot of other things. Matter of fact, we have actually had more people die of the flu than we've had of the virus. But what we haven't done is we have not adapted to the reality of what it really is. Now, I know we've got a number of military people that are in here, and I know that one of the things that we learned, although I was not a combat veteran, I did learn a lot about it. And that is, the battle plans are made by a staff based on information, hopefully the best information available about what they think the enemy has and what they think the enemy is going to do. And the commander of the troops has that battle plan when he goes to fight. But once that first shot is fired, it is incumbent upon that battle commander to adapt to the enemy's tactics and firepower. Because if he doesn't, he's going to get whooped. And that's what has happened with us. We haven't changed much of anything from day one. We're still treating it as much as last week, there was things said in a meeting, in one of our phone calls with the folks from Health and Human Services about, everybody exposed or going to get, infected or something of that nature. And I said, wait a minute, let's get this back into the reality. When you say all or everyone, that's not what we're seeing. See, folks, 80% of the deaths have been people over 60 with a serious immune problem. We've had about 50% of the people here in Texas, and I say about, our numbers say 50, but we do know that people in nursing homes are taken often from the hospital, the nursing home, and they go to the hospital, they die in the hospital. They don't count as a nursing home death when they do that. So our numbers at roughly 50%, I feel, are much higher than that. But a significant number of those people are already on hospice. So, and have serious problems. And some were well into hospice, but they tag every possible death they can. If you die of a heart attack, but you test positive for COVID, you're going to be tagged as a COVID death. The hospitals get more money that way. That's part of it. But we're not being told what the real truth is. People under 20, we've had less than 1% die. And a report I read last week on children, school-age children, the ages 15 and under, they are 4 times more likely to be hit by lightning and killed than to die of the COVID. So we need to recognize who is at risk and take our tactics and address that issue. Yes, there are people that can get it, and yes, it gets very serious. It's ugly, it's nasty, and it's not a very pretty death. And the way we have things set up, where no one can be visited in the hospital, is a very lonely one. So I'm not in any way discounting the seriousness of it or the importance of taking care of those who are susceptible to it, but a one-size-fits-all blanket requirement does not make any sense at all to do that. And what we're doing is shutting down our businesses and opening up again and shutting them down again, and who knows how many more times we're going to get ratcheted through this, is going to eventually result in a total destruction of our economy. And I don't think it's happening by accident. I listen to the media a whole lot, not because I like to hear them, because I want to know what they're saying and who is saying what. And believe me, they are misleading the people. And the biggest place they're misleading the people is by leading us to believe that there is no way to treat this thing. And that's absolutely not true. I have talked to doctor after doctor who are not associated with the hospitals but treat their patients in their office. Talked to one just over this weekend. She treated 78 patients. Not one of them has gotten sick enough to get in the hospital. Out of the 78, he only has 20 left that he's still treating. Talked to another that's up to about 400 patients now. And she has not had one person yet die. We had Robin Armstrong, Dr. Robin Armstrong, who is our Republican National Chairman. Really neat guy. Known him for a while. In March, he's down in Texas City. He has a nursing home down there, and 38 of his patients came tested positive. He put them on the same regimen of hydroxychloroquine, erythromycin, and zinc. 37 of them lived. One of them was a lady 102 years old. Came out of it. The one that did die was already in hospice. And so, folks, we're being misled because there are things that can be done. The hydroxychloroquine, as I am told by the doctor, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not giving you any medical advice. I'm just telling you what I've been told and what I have seen from what they've done. It is a prophylactic, and those that don't quite understand that, there is no one yet. It is a drug, if you don't know it, it's been used for rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. It's been around since 1950-something. Very effective. We don't see this COVID in those countries that have a lot of malaria because they use it there. And there is no record of anyone that was been treated for lupus with the hydroxychloroquine has come down with the virus. So while it may not have a government-sanctioned, high-priced study going, I can tell you, for someone who comes from a world of you adapt, improvise, and overcome whatever you're faced with, I think that we ought to be in that role. And the other thing is, not one of these patients that I've been talking about, any one of these doctors, has had any of the problems that the CDC and the FDA have said that people have with it. There was one doctor out in California who said he did 40,000 lupus patients he's had in his practice. He said, out of 40,000, I had one person that had an adverse reaction to it, and she had diarrhea for a week. That was it. And so, I tell you that so that, at least part of some of us out here know actually what's happening. And the other thing that is different about this, that has changed back and forth, and if you listen much to the, quote, professional doctors out of Washington, Fauci and Birx, you can see that they have been on both sides of any issue at least once during this whole thing, back and forth. I mean, Fauci, I listened to him that day when he told us we just may never shake hands again, and hugs may be a thing of the past. Won't do it. And a week later, on another program, when he was asked, well, what about these people that meet on these websites for one-night stands for sex? He says, well, there's just some things you just need to take a risk for. I mean, folks, come on. But anyway, that's what's really, we laugh, it's funny. But those are the people that we are taking information, receiving information from, that is guiding our economy right down into the toilet, which is where it's headed right now. So the other aspect of this thing is the asymptomatic folks. That is the folks who have the virus and they don't know it. They have no symptoms at all. They just walk around with the virus like anybody else is. They go through the whole thing, and some of them might have a day or two they feel bad in varying degrees, but never to the point that they say, I need to go see a doctor. Latest report that I read this morning says that about 45% of the people with the virus are asymptomatic. So let's see how that plays into the thing I think you really want to hear about is contact tracing. And what does the government have in mind for that? For those of you who don't know it, it used to be called contact tracking. But they did a poll, and it didn't poll very well because people didn't like being tracked. So they changed the name to contact tracing, and that seemed to be okay. That's all they changed was the name. It's the same thing. But it's nothing new. And I'll say it is a legitimate healthcare tool that we've had since the early 1900s. It was how we found Typhoid Mary initially. It makes sense, and it works on something like typhoid, Ebola, HIV, STDs. That makes sense. They are contagious, but they're not highly contagious. And if you get it, you're pretty well on a path to die. And it moves very slow. So you can then find somebody who has it in time to find out who they've been in contact with, because it takes a different kind of contact than just being within a few feet of someone for a few minutes. And it makes sense to do it. We've had it around, we've used it numerous times, and it makes sense. But now, for this, it falls under the category of one of my favorite sayings, and that is there's never a right way or a right time to do the wrong thing. And contact tracing for this virus is wrong technically, it's wrong financially, and it's wrong morally. And we should not be doing it. Technically, with 45% of people being asymptomatic, it makes no sense to spend all that time and effort thinking you're doing something to slow the spread by tracking the 55% that you might be able to find. That makes no sense at all to do that. Financially, folks, we're in trouble financially in this state. We're in real big trouble like we have never been before. You haven't felt it, you don't know it yet, but we are in real big trouble. It started, oil and gas has been down. You know, that feels good when you pump that $1.70 gas, $1.50, that felt real good. But the other side of it is that's one of our major sources of revenue for the state. It's down. And then the first weekend that we were able to go to a restaurant, I went to one of ours there in Canton talking to the owner, and he was, I happen to be open. He said, 25%, I can't make any money, but I've got my folks, I can pay them anyhow. And he said, you know, he says, I usually send in a check to the state for sales tax of about $6,000 a month. He says, I just sent in the check for last month, it was $700. That's big. 3 days later, I was on a phone conversation with some folks with the railroad. We're talking about a number of things, and one of them is pointed out, I asked a question, I said, I bet your shipments are up with Amazon and Google. And they said, oh yeah, they are. Yeah, they're up a little bit. But they said our new car sales, new car shipments are down 70%. 70%. Now, sales tax on new cars and vehicle registration is a major part of our income. Businesses are shut, so the franchise tax is going to be way down. And I was wondering about the lottery, and last week, sure enough, it's down to, I thought it'd be up, but no, the lottery is down also. Not that I mean, it's only $1 billion. And I say only $1 billion, you gotta remember, folks, our biannual budget is $250 billion. $250 billion. That's a lot of money. But we're not gonna see anything near that. Your cities and counties, their sales tax are gonna be down. And so you're gonna have cities and counties that are just chomping at the bit to do the one thing that they have a control over, and that is to raise your property taxes. And so that's gonna be a local fight for you guys to take that one on. But to get back to contact tracing, we don't need to spend, we just issued a contract under very questionable conditions. And I say questionable conditions because I was in the contracting business for 25 years. I know what it takes to go through a solicitation, a proposal, evaluation, of a contract award for very things from as small as $10,000 to $4 billion. We did that. I know what it is. This contract was for $295 million. And from the time they said we need to write a solicitation until they made it a contract award was less than a week. It usually takes 6 months to a year to make a contract. To a company, when I say small, a small company that had never done this before, it had less than 200 employees. 175 of them were in Bangladesh. Literally, they were. And I'm not sure, we're working on whether the state knew it at the time, but they were trying to get a similar contract with other states, and they managed to get it with 16 other states at the same time that they got this one. Nobody ever heard of it before. They'd never done this before. The biggest contract they had was for a couple of $1 million. And the reports were that they had failed on a Kentucky contract and one in New York in their performance, but everybody just seemed to want to overlook that and not talk about it. But what got me is I've seen startups, I've seen businesses that win a contract, a large contract, they have to build up the personnel to do the job. Their challenge with this contract and those others, if the other states, and I don't know what the size was, but I'm just going to assume they were the same size as the one in Texas, which was to hire about 4,000 people. And they argued, oh, Texans are out of work, they'll be glad to go to work for them. That wasn't the issue. But if they did the same thing, going for 200 people, that would have meant, that means that they had to increase their personnel by 38,000%. 38,000%. Folks, that's not even practical to do that. So that's just one other part of it. But the tracking itself, so when we first started learning about this, I felt, well, I need to find out for sure what it is that people say, or what they're saying they plan to do. So I didn't look on Facebook, and I didn't go read stuff on the internet. I went straight to the people within Health and Human Services of the state who were responsible for putting this program together and had them explain it to me. And so they started out with some of the stuff I started explaining to you about tracing and where it came from and so on. And they talked about it was going to be voluntary program and so on, and the governor has said it's all going to be voluntary. And so what I said, well, explain to me how this is going to work. And so they said, okay, we'll have it set up so that when someone gets tested and they test positive, the lab will contact the state and give them the person's name, address, and phone number, the organization, the contractor that's doing this. And they will then contact the person, because I said, my question was, how is this voluntary? What's the voluntary about? Well, I'm giving you the description they gave me. And remember, I'm getting this straight from them. They're planning this whole thing. What they didn't tell me was this conversation was taking place 2 days before they awarded their contract. They didn't even mention it during the conversation. That told me something later. They said, okay, they will contact the person and said, we're not going to ask them any personal information about bank accounts and finances or anything like that. We just want to know, where they've been and who they may have been with. And I said, and that's just voluntary. I said, oh, it's voluntary. They don't have to answer us. Matter of fact, they can hang up the phone. And I said, okay. I said, but okay, so you're asking them where they've been. I said, for how long back? Well, probably a week, maybe 10 days. How many of you, I asked you, who were you with on last Thursday, last Tuesday, Sunday, could give much of an accurate, I was exactly where you were. Maybe I was in Chili's for lunch one day, I think it was Monday or Tuesday, and I go, no. I said, how are they going to provide any meaningful information outside of the immediate family and whatever? And the answer I got was, well, the businesses will be keeping a log of who's in their facility, restaurants. Now, wasn't long after that, I had people calling me and telling me I was in a restaurant and they required me to give them my driver's license to take down my name and address before they would let me in. And one woman said, and what if I don't give it to you? And he said, well, we can't let you in. He said, that's good with me, and out she went. And others gave him the name and address and so on. But they're talking about other stores doing the same thing because that'd be the only way they'd be able to. And I don't know how they could possibly manage all that data, but this is what they told me. Later conversations, they kind of backed off on that a little bit, but they work for the government, so I'm not sure how much you can even trust them in anything. So I said, okay, but so that was a volunteer with the first person that had taken the test and it was positive, but they give you the name of this person that you were talking to. How does he volunteer? How does he volunteer to be called? Oh, well, he doesn't have to answer us either. And on down the line. And if you think the piece about keeping the log, there might be a little much. Wait till I tell you the next part. The next part was, okay, so what are you going to do about this person that now says that may have been exposed to it, that they're supposed to be quarantined or isolated? How's that going to work? I said, well, the things we'll ask them about are really their living conditions. What size house do they have and how many people are in it? Because they need to know if this may be a family of 5 in a 2-bedroom house with 1 bathroom, and maybe there's a child involved or an elderly person, it's not going to be possible to quarantine within that house. So someone's going to have to go somewhere else. Where are they going to go? Oh, we're setting up government-run housing in hotels and motels that we will put them in for the quarantine period. And I said, and voluntary? They said, well, we hope they volunteer. Oh no, folks, it gets worse. It gets worse. I said, you hope, and if they don't, where in the world do you think you're going to get the authority to require someone to give up their child or their grandparent, go put them someplace, or them, or whoever it is you're going to decide that you're going to stuff off into this quarantine? Where in the world do you think you're going to get the authority to do that? And without batting an eye, they said, oh, we already have it. We don't need to get it. And the scary part is, she was absolutely right. It already exists in the health code that the county health official has the authority to require someone with a contagious disease to be forcibly quarantined. And that came into being, and I can't argue with it, because it had a really good purpose when people would get a contagious disease and they would go out purposely trying to infect other people. And that's what it was intended to be used for, is someone who was doing it. And it has happened. We do have a history of it. It's real, it has happened, and it has a, but it's like everything else. It's like we're told in Ecclesiastes. There is a time and place for everything, but it doesn't mean that everything has every place. And so this is one of them. But anyway, that was the answer that I was given. So what we're seeing now, though, is what they're implementing is an absolute, unmitigated, total disaster. It is not working. It is so mismanaged and so unorganized. That you found out last week, just read another article, that it's taking 10 to 14 days between the time the person gets tested and the name gets sent to the people who's going to try them. Now that's more than the quarantine period for the thing. And so we are out there just gleefully, day after day, spending that $295 million on something that makes no sense at all. Because while we're tracking that person that was tested, there's another person out here, and may even be more. I read another article that said there may be as many as 10 to 15 times as many people who are asymptomatic. We don't know. We just don't know. And so, but are asymptomatic, we aren't bothering to do anything about it. So, we will see how this is going to work out, but that is where we are. That is what they have planned for contact tracking. I'm hopeful that there will be enough pressure brought that it will come to an end. So if the question is, how do we do that? The only way I see out of that is you guys. You see, the legislature, we have no role. We have no power. We're not meeting. We don't go into session until January. Governor Abbott is in 100% total charge of this. And he's got some people giving him advice that are giving him some very, very bad advice. And for whatever reason, he has chosen not to try to seek any good advice from some people. He'd rather make his decisions based on polls and out there. So we now have a few counties, and here's where you get involved, is to get our counties and our cities to pass a resolution that says we will not participate in contact tracing. If you're going to do it, Mr. State, then you come do it. You do it all on your own, because we're not going to help you. Because the state is counting on the counties and the cities to actually fill the gap on some of this for manpower. So those of you who know and work with, and I know there's some of you here, some of your county commissioners and your city councilmen, here's part of your civic duty, is to get with them and get them to pass a resolution. We can get you a draft of a typical resolution that has been passed in other places that you can use. But you know, we are a nation of government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That's not just a cutesy little saying that came from a long time ago. It is the absolute gospel truth. The problem is, us people have mostly abdicated our responsibility for making sure that our government, when you talk about and complain about the government, you need to look in the mirror, because there is not one person that's in office that was put there by themselves. You and all the rest of the people that either voted or didn't vote, or worked on a campaign or didn't work on a campaign, are 100% responsible for those people who are in office.
Sure.
You put them there. I put them there. You know, it's a we thing. Because our government is of the people. And we have the power of term limits. that we don't exercise. We continue to not pay enough attention to who's running for office to find out anything more than the campaign slogans and bumper sticker statements and how they comb their hair or what color of dress or shirt they might wear and decide whether they like them based on whether they have a dog or not. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy things that I've listened to people talk about why they like a particular candidate and dislike them. Very little of it often has to do with the basic principles on which they live and do. And we get such an incredibly poor turnout. I mean, we got a runoff election here, and I'll bet you we won't hit 8%. We won't hit 8%. But I guarantee you there'll be 92% of the people complaining about what is out there. And let me just kind of wrap it up with talk a little bit about asking the question, is anybody really concerned about where we are today as a nation? Think about this. Just about 6 weeks ago, there was a lady down in Dallas who was trying to feed her children by doing something that was perfectly legal a couple of weeks before that as a hairdresser. And she was put in handcuffs and put in jail for doing that. And we fast forward here for a few weeks and we see property being destroyed, private property destroyed, public property destroyed, assaults, people being killed, and not one person has been charged with doing anything wrong. I think the count's up to 12 people were killed by the rioters. It's hard to keep track of it because the media won't tell you about it. How did we get here? And how much longer are we going to let this happen as people?
What can we do?
Well, let me talk about what I see happening here. And I think there's a story. I'll tell you a story about Khrushchev. When he first took power, and he was on one of the farms there, talking to people about socialism and what it was going to do for the people, and how it would provide them with food and housing, clothing, medical care. And while he's talking to them on this farm, there's some chickens running around. He reaches down and he picks up the chicken. He's holding them underneath his arms. And as he continues to talk to people and talk to them about it, he starts pulling the feathers out of the chicken. He pulls out one or two, and then 3 or 4, and then a handful of them, and he's pulling that chicken, starts to scream and hollering, and he's ripping feathers out of the chicken, and he keeps pulling them out, and he finally gets all the most of the feathers out of the chicken, and screaming and hollering and bleeding, and he sits it down on the ground, and he walks over to a bag of feed, picks up a handful of feed, walks back to the chicken, drops a little bit in front of it, the chicken starts to eat it, he backs up a little bit, drops a little more on the ground, finally walks all the way across the barnyard there, and the chicken follows him all the way. When he stops feeding it, the chicken sits there and just looks at him waiting. Folks, that's what they're doing to us. Because this started with putting absolute, total fear in you. How many of you felt your gut get knotted up with fear when they told you that if you stuck your head outside the door, you were going to get the COVID? And if you got the COVID, you're going to die. Isn't that? And it didn't matter how old you were. It didn't matter whether you were male or female. It didn't matter whether you were black or white or brown or yellow or red. Everybody's going to get it. It's going to be the same. Scared you to death. And then started giving a little bit back by opening up a little here, opening up a little there. Where was the outrage? Where was the outrage when the business was shut down? We just let it happen. We just let it happen. And until the people stop letting it happen, it's going to keep happening. Things will open back up again, but they've demonstrated what I think they really wanted to have. They've demonstrated it. We'll take about anything to The government heals it out. We'll just take about anything. So what did they do to heal the wound, drop the foods? They came up with federal money. So much federal money that we have people right now that will refuse to go back to work because they're making more money in unemployment than they were in their jobs. And that's not coming to an end anytime soon. They just extended it a couple of weeks ago for another 13 weeks. So we have businesses out here that would like to open up when they can, but they cannot going to get their employees back. And the latest estimate I have is that 44% of our small businesses will not reopen. And small businesses are the backbone of this country. But we sure left the big boxes open, didn't we? We sure did, and they're working real hard to take away our voting rights. Because if we go to mail-in ballots, you will lose your voting rights, period. It will be just a futile exercise to make you feel good. I said, I got a solution. Everybody's worried about going to the polls. Just put the voting machines in Walmart. And, you know, nobody's afraid to go there.
Well, that might wait.
Folks, what has really happened to us? It's the one thing that I have to say Barack Obama was right when he said, we are no longer a Christian nation. We have drifted so far away from what our founding fathers intended for us to be. They would be rolling over in their graves, looking at us. There is no question at all when those 55 men, of which 52 of the 55 were Christians. And when they talked about religion, they were talking about which denomination of Christianity were they. That was the only discussion about the difference between the Christians. Two of the founders went on to found the American Biblical Society. And in 1790 and in 1840, there were court cases that reaffirmed that Christianity and our form of government were intricately woven together. They were inseparable. And it wasn't until 1947, in a case, that they brought up the Thomas Jefferson letter, or letter written by a private citizen, not the government, because I think everyone in the room knows that the term separation of church and state does not exist in the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, and for a good reason, because it was not intended to be. But it was in a letter that was written in about 1802 by Thomas Jefferson in responding to an inquiry from some Baptist preachers in Danbury, Connecticut, because at that time, each of the states had its own constitution, and most of them had a state religion. Connecticut, it was the Congregationalists. And these Baptists were upset because the Congregationalists were getting state money and they weren't getting it. And so they wrote to Thomas Jefferson and asked him, can that be? And he said, well, they're talking at the federal level. There is a separation between the two. Well, that got taken totally out of context and used to be the first stone in building that wall of separation. And in 1962, we took the prayer out of our schools. And in 1963, we took the Bibles out. And then in 1980, we took the Ten Commandments out. And the justices, when they took the Ten Commandments out, explained their rationale. And their rationale was something like, what they said was, if these students were to read what's in those Ten Commandments, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not steal, etc., it might be psychologically damaging to them to forget that. That was their rationale. But each step of the way, Where was the outrage? Because now the next step from 1980 to 2020, we have the government tell us, you can't go to church, your churches are shut. And when you say, well, where do I go? What do I do? They say, hey, the liquor stores are open. It's okay. They shut our churches but left the liquor stores open. If that's not, you can't go there, we will let them deliver your drinks from the restaurants to your homes. You can now have home delivery for liquor. The stroke of a pen, we did that. But where was the outrage? Where's the outrage? Where were the, you realize that many of the leaders in the revolution were pastors? They were pastors that led men, the Black Robe Regiment. They would go right from the pulpit out to the battlefield, conquered on the green. They went straight out there. The pastors were leading the way. The Declaration of Independence, every one of those grievances that was put in the Declaration of Independence came from a pastor's sermon. They were part of what they had said. They were the leaders, but we hear no outrage. And the question I have is, how does someone who professes to be a Christian can sit in a pew on Sunday and then vote for a party that will kill babies in the womb, and now it's okay to kill them if they survive the abortion on the table in the hospital? It's okay to do that. But they'll show back up in church the following Sunday. How can that be? And so while we want to rail against our leaders, and I'm not here to protect them in any way because I have a hard time with many of them, of what they do, folks, it's our fault. It's who we put in office. We need to be more active as an entire society in vetting the people that we're going to put into office, getting to know who they really are, and not just looking at the bumper stickers and the campaign slogans to make the change. Or we'll see more of what we've seen, because at the end of all of this, what I talked about just a little while ago, and I'm going to wrap it up with this. With the riots out there, we saw our leaders, some of them with the police, some elected officials, and others, to quell the riot. And folks, what did they do? They got on their knees and begged for their forgiveness. Folks, I wouldn't get on my knees for anybody but my Lord Jesus Christ, period. Amen. And that's what we need to demand in the future. Until we step up and start making those kinds of demands and holding them accountable, we're going to get what we got. We're going to get more of it. So, let me stop there. I have other things, but I know it's getting late here. You've got other things to do. People want to go home. Let me take a couple of questions and I'll.
Before,
Yes, sir.
before we get into questions, I'd like to just say one thing, and that is that I appeared before the Commissioners Court last Tuesday and told them I was bringing a resolution. So I'm asking for help. You know, I have a sample of a resolution. It's too many whereases and wherefores, but I'd like to get some help, get people behind us, and let's go to the Commissioners Court in mass and tell them we want it passed. No, I don't have a session tomorrow. It'll have to be next week.
It's at 10 o'clock on Tuesday, for what?
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that resolution, see that, answer that. Is there a local bureaucratic area about this health services that we can contact and tell them our displeasure about this tracing? Is it local, is it?
You'll find out, I know that each county is different.
Okay.
You can go to the county office and find out, what is the role of the county health department.
County Health Department?
Yes. That's what
I will get this $295 million thing. Right.
kiss it goodbye. It's gone. There's very, very little chance it gets much better. Very, very little chance. Yes.
Does that go the medical, information and knowledge.
No, I've raised that question, and they say no, because everybody in the league will be considered part of the health process, and so they can exchange the information between them.
How is anyone in Bangladesh being part of my health?
I'm just telling you what they told me.
I know, I'm just-
No, I highly question the thing, that I think people will be severely violated with this. Yes, sir.
FEMA has created 1,200 prison camps, and there are 30,000 Liberties in them here in the United States. When it's gonna stop?
That's a federal issue. I got my hands full with the state. Right.
I think it's a godless problem, but I see it as a constitutional problem. You're asking, where is the outrage? I'm from Oklahoma, and I'm moved. I am so angry over this. I'm angry with just everything. And I'm wondering, and I sit and I watch, and there's right now, there's a military coup against Trump right now. And I'm thinking, here are all these disrespected officers, and there's a lot of military men in here, and I was under the impression that you took an oath to protect this country to protect the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. I don't understand why George Soros and Barack Obama and all these people are still organizing all of this criminality. And I would love to see the men and women just start organizing and pushing back against this. But I'm angry, and I've been angry.
And rightfully so. Yes, sir. One in the back. Yes, sir.
The COVID testing, do they look for a live virus, or, I mean, if you're cured, or does it still show up as a positive test?
I've heard so many answers on that, and the other part of it is, it ranges as high as 20 to 30% false negatives and false positives, that there's not a whole lot, and the doctors that are treating it with boots on the ground from their family practice offices, what they do is they look for the symptoms, and they treat based on symptoms, not on running a particular test. I haven't heard anything that would give me a whole lot of confidence in the accuracy of the test. But the cry for doing more testing is so loud that the only answer is, well, we'll just do more testing. Yes, yes, sir.
Come on, you secede from the United States.
Yes, yes.
My question is, I read that, $250 million. How deep is that well that you make a record? You're making a record, but by and large, no record, $250 million. So I've often wondered, how in the world, how deep is that well?
It is bottomless.
That we have, that get by. To me, that's a caution.
This is the course we've been on since the early part of the 19th century, when we first passed the income tax and started the process to give the government an unlimited supply of money, with 0.5% to what it's grown to today. And then when we went off the gold standard with Nixon in the 60s, it just accelerated it. And now, we're only able to do this because the dollar is the world's currency. The day we fall from being the world's currency, you will see inflation, double, triple-digit inflation in this country like we've never seen it before. We are only able to hold this the way we are. That $230 million, that was federal money. That was part of what we got from the Fed. And I hate saying that because I'm one who often says there is no such thing as federal money. There is no such thing as state money. The federal money is what we take out of your left pocket. The state money is what we take out of your right pocket. And the county gets it from your back pocket. There. I mean, it's all your money. And it's the saddest part about this, the part that irritates and gets to me the most, this is debt that we will never pay. But our children and our grandchildren are going to be saddled with this, of having to pay these taxes before they can feed their kids. And we keep doing it, and keep doing it, and keep doing it.
I've been speaking of the boundaries. I understand what you said, but I guess what struck me was that from the legislature or from someone, that there was not a checks that one agency could run for $250 million. How do you make it work?
It's all because in this time frame, all rules, regulations have been waived. There are no rules, there are no regulations. The governor has total authority to overrule every rule or regulation. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know anything about the tracing apps or the software updates we're putting on our phones? I do. I have the last update. It showed up on my phone.
It's embedded now, that's.
And
No.
I have heard that you have to download an app, and then I've also read you don't have to download an app, that it's going to be automatic.
Apple's helping us with that. They're doing it. Now, with the
You know, you already have,
It-
if you read the reports that have been out there where they came out and were able to totally independently identify where people had been and what the groups were, they were doing that using the phones. All I know is when we brought that issue up, I was told that that part of the that was taken out of their contract. Texas is not doing that as a part of it. That didn't mean it can't be put back in, but it was enough said about it that they took that out.
I put my vote in the Faraday cage.
Yeah. All right, let me two more here now. Yes, ma'am.
What can we do now to craft a constitutional amendment to the Texas Constitution to pursue a recall election so that,
We don't have recall in Texas, it have to be with the legislature.
I know that, but what can we do now to begin to craft a constitutional amendment so that we can get one in place? Because if it had been in place, somebody I know, Benedict Avenue.
We'll see if that just may be one of the planks that's coming up in the convention as we redo the Republican platform. That would be a place to get it. The other is to talk to your senator and your rep here about them introducing a bill at the next session. Okay. Yes, sir.
You mentioned 35 or 45% asymptomatic. In your knowledge or what you've heard, and the 0.26%, are they not including the percentage of asymptomatic unknowns and even people that may have had it already early on, and then they just be have the antibodies? So is that even in the equation in the 0.26?
As best I can tell, if someone is asymptomatic and they die, it doesn't matter because they're going to have died of something else. They didn't cause their death. Although they're now saying that there is some long-term damage that people may have to their blood and lungs that were actually asymptomatic, that isn't enough for them to notice right away, but maybe a problem later on. I mean, there's just so much they don't really know, or they're not leaving something. But the 0.26 strictly is tied to those who tested positive, got sick, and died.
Okay, so so they're not putting a percentage of, well, there's so many out there that
No,
have antibodies.
that would dilute it way too much.
So, yeah, so
Oh,
yeah,
no,
that would-
if they got to the honest assessment, including all the asymptomatic, that number would be down
That's what I thought.
to minuscule.
Thank you.
Okay, one more.
This is
She's
mandated.
gonna shoot me.
No, I'm not, dude. Go on as long as you want.
That makes that 2.4. This is mandated by the state. How is the resolution of our county commissioners going to have any effect? Because it's all about enforcement. If the county doesn't want to enforce it with the sheriff and take people off to quarantine camps, who says that the state doesn't want to do it with the highway patrol or something there?
Okay, back up a step. the county is not gonna help track. That's where, when they don't track, and the state is gonna be, they're not gonna possibly have the manpower to do it. But the point is we get the counties to do this, the whole thing will collapse. They won't be able to do it because they're counting on the manpower from each of the counties. This is not necessarily the manpower to grab people and take them off. This is the tracking to go talk to the people or make the phone calls to talk to the people, just not going to participate.
Let's give them a hand.
Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. You can see there's a lot of interest in this, and we have, yeah.
I've got a number of printouts here of our capital hall report on this, a couple of things I've written about. And if you're not following our Facebook page, it's simply Senator Bob Hall, and our website is senatorbobhall.com. We post on a regular basis some rather neat stuff about things, and so you can keep up with what's going on, because I do write a lot on this, and but we got your copies up here. That's just Senator Bob Hall on Facebook.
Does anyone want some?
If you're not on social media, just give us your address and now let's see it.
You want to pass these out for anyone that would like to have them? Suzanne? Okay, Suzanne's going to help them. Anna? I think so.